Hello, I want to thank everyone for listening today. My name is Christopher Cameron. I'm here with Kelly Krish. We are delivering a webinar today for common questions associated with starting an environmental monitoring program. In the past, Kelly and I usually get about 12 questions or so a month, roughly about there, from institutions, from colleagues that are interested in starting an environmental monitoring program. Not exactly sure where to start, what to do, what they should have. So we decided we want to help people answer these questions. We want to compile the top 5 questions that we get and help everyone out get their program up and running. So we created this webinar to achieve that. So first we'll start with some introductions. My name is Christopher Cameron, Sustainable Preservation Specialist here at IPI. I've been with IPI for about 5 years. I am the yin to Kelly's yang on the environmental monitoring team. I handle the mechanical aspect of the collections environments we look at. I worked before IPI, I worked as a facility manager for 12 years. And I handled everything from office buildings to large lab facilities with just about every kind of HVAC one could expect. So when we go into spaces, I usually take the aspect of examining how the mechanical systems are operating, and Kelly complements me by looking at the collection spaces.
So I'm Kelly Krish. I'm the Preventive Conservation Specialist at IPI. I trained as an objects conservator with a specialization in preventive conservation before joining IPI about 2.5 years ago. Like Chris, I'm part of the environmental team, but as he said, my focus is on collections and to serve as a resource on preventive issues. So the two of us have done a range of consulting projects, everything from assessments to mechanical system optimization, and have worked for over 30 museums, libraries and archives, historical societies, and other organizations across the country. But the environmental team is just one part of IPI.
So those of you who aren't familiar with IPI, I'll give you a quick background. IPI is a nonprofit research lab. The lab is located in Rochester, New York, on the campus of the Rochester Institute of Technology. The lab was founded 32 years ago in the home city of Kodak, which is how the lab got its start doing research into film preservation. We've continued to expand, doing more research into mechanical and chemical deterioration for a range of cultural materials. And a lot of this research has helped contribute to our educational programs, one being this webinar you're listening to today. We have a series of other webinars that we offer, workshops, publications, as well as some products and services many of you may be familiar with, as the AD strips or eClimate Notebook or even the PEM data loggers. So again, today's webinar is really designed to help people set up an environmental monitoring program. If you're new and aren't sure exactly what to start, we decided to select those 5 questions that we get from the most people. However, if you have any further questions, please feel free to submit them to us. There's a question box. You should have a question box on your screen. Type up any questions you might have and forward them to us. At the end of the presentation, we'll address any of the ones as many of the ones as we can. If you feel that you have a question we haven't answered, or if you feel there's something we could go into more depth on or we can give more information on, please feel free to let us know. We'll have our emails are on the previous slide, but we'll also have them at the end of the presentation. So you can send us if you want to just kind of email us personally, both Kelly and I will be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. So let's jump right in. What environmental monitoring tools should you be using? We've worked with people that use everything from spot checking thermostats on a wall and writing them down on a piece of paper, to hygrothermographs, to digital data loggers, you name it, we've kind of seen it all. One of the things we really stress is, having a record of being able to keep that data, because you cannot manage what you do not measure. So if you're not recording that data, if you have no way to actually see and analyze what's going on in your space, you can't actually make qualified judgments or changes to your collection space. So first thing first, we would recommend, hygrothermographs are good tools. They were great back in their day, essentially, although I hate saying that. But for the cost of a hygrothermograph, you can get a decent, or at least 2 or 3 decent data loggers. And realistically, between the upkeep on hygrothermographs, the pens that need to be replaced routinely, or the papers, we kind of recommend staying away from them. Especially the fact of when it comes time to analyze them, it's hard to do analysis, and that requires a fair amount of math. But also, I worked with an institution when they asked us to analyze their data. I asked them to send over a hygrothermograph, and what they sent looked like it had gone around for the better part of a year. So there was not much analysis I can do. It was pretty much looking at it and telling them the highs and lows in their collection space. So we want things that you can easily store, easily analyze, easily look at. And a lot of that, or not a lot of it, all of it comes down to your digital data loggers. There's 4 examples on the bottom screen of some digital data loggers. That's only a scratch of the number of data loggers that are offered. There's countless organizations that sell them or make them. But when you're looking at data loggers, there's a few things to keep in mind. The priority is you want to use data loggers that are calibrated and have reliable temperature and relative humidity. You're going to be making decisions based upon the data you have and the information you have to make like an educated guess as to changes for your collection space. And making those changes, you want to have the most reliable information possible. That's having loggers that are calibrated, and we've come across a few that are sold that aren't calibrated. They're just, you're kind of getting what they have, and it's rare, but there are a few out there. But it's more the reliable temperature and relative humidity. Some, their sensors aren't as accurate. So when you're looking and making that decision, you want to try and get those loggers, you want to try and get a logger that has that offset for the temperature and relative humidity that's as small as possible. Also, when you're setting up your loggers, there's the option for the sampling rate. You want to set that logger to sample rate for at least every 30 minutes. We've seen 8 hours. We've seen people sample every 2 hours, like twice a day. That 30 minutes, while the others will give you some idea of what's happening in your space, a sampling rate of every 30 minutes will help you paint a picture of what's really taking place in your environment. You start getting that data, you can see things. We can look at data that's over a day that's done every 30 minutes. And when you really dig into it, you can see when staff come in, when they turn lights on, when the HVAC system turns on. You can start to find things in your data you didn't know are actually occurring. You can even see fluctuations with the HVAC equipment at times. So it's good to have that, sampling rate like that. You can actually go lower on some loggers. I know especially ACRs and hobos, you can go down to a minute if you'd like. The problem with going too low, you wind up overloading the data points, and you could slow down analysis or the graphs loading and things like that. So we find that 30 minutes to be that perfect sweet spot for when you're selecting your data points. Another thing when looking at your loggers, Bluetooth is really important. There are a number of loggers that have Bluetooth on them. It's important to know whether it's the facility you're having or the cabinets or drawers that you're using for your collection can handle the Bluetooth signal well. And I know it may sound somewhat ridiculous, but we've seen a number of facilities that have trouble getting cell phone signal, wireless signal in. And because of that, they've had some trouble with Bluetooth. We've used one Bluetooth logger here in the lab we tested, and we took it over to the library on campus. And within line of sight, about 100 feet away from the logger, perfect signal from it. But I walked up and was 15 feet away from the same logger on Bluetooth, and with 3 bookshelves in the way, couldn't get a good signal. So just knowing how the logger is going to handle and how your facility is going to handle is good to know when selecting which logger. You may have to, unfortunately, get one and test it out before you make a decision to buy a number of them. But other than that, if you're using a series of vitrines or cabinets, not having to disturb the collection, being able to walk through and pull data is incredibly useful. And lastly, one thing that most people don't know is you sometimes don't always need to have data loggers. You do want them, but another thing you can use at times is your BMS system. Your BMS system is the building management system. It helps control the HVAC equipment that runs your facility. If your system is fairly new, if the sensors have been installed in the last 3 to 5 years, the sensors should be reliable enough that you can cull the data from the loggers and export that and upload it to a software like eClimate Notebook and use the thermostat on the wall as an extra monitoring point. But again, you want to make sure that the loggers or the sensors have been calibrated, and that they have some the sensors have been calibrated, and that they're reliable to an extent. Sorry. And there are, obviously not up here, but other tools you can use just for spot checking, things like thermostats or not thermostats, digital thermometers or sensors, just to get spot checking around the space. So let's start our counting. How many loggers do we need? Well, there's no such thing as having too much data. So you can never have too many loggers in your collection space. Granted, we don't want to see you pepper a collection space with loggers, but it's good. Sometimes you need one per space, or sometimes you want 2 or 3 depending on the conditions in there. So unfortunately, the first things first, there's no formula to how many loggers you need. You may have a space that needs 2 or 3, like I said earlier, or may have a space that only needs 1. Unfortunately, leaving this webinar, you're not going to know offhand, like, I'm definitely going to need 8 for my collection or 10. We could have a building, 2 identically built buildings next to each other, and just based off simple needs or use of the facility, the number of collection materials is going to be different. The number of loggers they need for the collection materials is going to be different. So we do have a few guidelines that you can follow when you're trying to get that number for how many loggers you need. The first one you're going to want is, what are you monitoring for? I mean, that's the biggest question we could ask. Are you monitoring for, your general display area, your galleries? You just want one in a gallery, in each gallery, to see what's happening to the collection? Do you want one for your storage spaces? Do you want to see where the collection's living? When it's at rest, what's happening? Are you trying to monitor past issues? Have you had mold, like this poor book over here on the left, with, you want to see how the collection's handling after the mold outbreak? Have you had past moisture issues where you want to sample the air around in the moisture location? So in a situation, say you have a moisture leak, you might have a logger in the general center of the room, and then maybe a logger closer to the moisture leak to try and identify, is the moisture level changing? Is it adjusting in that area? Or do I have a microclimate? Or are you, trying to answer loan requirements? A number of institutions have museums or institutions that want to loan materials to them, but they always have that, what are your conditions question. So having the data loggers helps you get that third person witness, if you will, to help determine what the conditions are in your space. So when the questions come up about loan requirements, you can hand over an assessment and say, hey, they look exactly like this, and it helps you give it a better argument for why you should or could have the loan in your facility. Other things you can use using the data loggers for is evaluating whether or not you have stratification in your collection space. That bottom picture there, it doesn't do the space much justice, but those are 25-foot high ceilings in a storage area. It's a big annex facility. And in a situation like that, you could have, we'll say, a poorly insulated roof, and you gain a lot of heat in the summertime, maybe lose a lot of heat in the wintertime, and you're trying to evaluate what's going on in the space, what the collection's seeing. So you may put a logger down on the lower shelf. We can put a logger on the center shelf, put a logger on the top shelf, and see what may be happening, top to bottom. You may see a few degrees, or in some circumstances, we've actually seen large gains from bottom to top, which leads us to, break down exactly what's happening in space and make better storage decisions for the collection based on that. So long and short of it, if you're deciding what loggers or how many loggers you need, the best place to start, if you just need a quick, what should I do? A good place to start is having at least one data logger per collection space. And especially important in collection storage, because our goal is the long-term storage. Again, when the collection's at rest, when it's put away, if you will, what's it experiencing, where is it living, what's it going through? So now placing the data loggers. And as I just said a second ago, our goal is to, we're monitoring to see what the collection is experiencing, where it lives. Essentially, we're trying to see how everything that's going through. So there's a written record, in a way, for what the collection has had while it's been in our care, your care. When you're monitoring general collections, for example, like display areas, galleries, one good thing to keep in mind is monitoring where the collection is currently being displayed, and that's the 4 to 6 feet off the floor, that's eye level. Keeping it close to the collection materials is important as well. We have seen people that will put the loggers out in the gallery area and have it on the far side of the room, away near a door or a window, and it's not feeling truly what the collection is feeling. It's getting some interference. So keeping it close to the collections, again, eye level, we're trying to see what the collection is seeing itself, not just what the room is feeling, not just what the room is feeling, sorry. And lastly on that, one thing to remember is do not keep your loggers near stray sources of heat, moisture. We want to avoid, we'll get phone calls from people that tell them, I have data loggers, they're not functioning properly, my RH is too high. And as we start working with them, we'll dig deeper into the problem or the issue, and we'll come to find out the data logger was behind a computer monitor or over a coffee maker. And the errant heat and moisture that they're emitting kind of throws the logger off and gives some false readings that we weren't expecting. And, you know, knowing that we can help them rectify, but as you're starting out, just remember that, you know, stray sources of heat, moisture, ductworks, things like that can throw loggers off, you know, from what you're actually seeing.
Okay, so aside from the general collection spaces that you'd want to monitor, there are some other special situations where you may want to have data loggers as well. So these would be added to that tally of the approximately 1 logger per room. The first instance would be if there are specific objects, either those lone objects that Chris mentioned that have strict environmental requirements in order to have them on display, or objects within your own collection that are either especially significant or especially vulnerable to environmental conditions. So those are ones that may warrant having a data logger that captures the environment around them specifically. The other situation could be the types of housings that the materials have. In both storage and display situations, you can have objects on open display. They might be in cabinets, or they might even be in boxes with tissue paper in a high-density storage situation. And so in each of these, it's going to offer, these types of enclosures are all going to offer a degree of buffering capacity and may affect the temperature and relative humidity in different ways. So getting a sense of what materials stored in these situations would be experiencing is also important. And then this is, if one of your environmental monitoring questions that you'd like to answer has to do with past issues or trouble areas that you've identified, those would be additional data loggers as well. So this is really looking at anywhere where collections conditions can differ. Heat and water sources or any penetration into the building envelope can create microclimates. This can result in accelerated deterioration, mechanical damage, metal corrosion, and probably what we see most frequently is mold germination in collection spaces. So you definitely want to avoid these issues. Furthermore, oftentimes these microclimates can indicate a room or an envelope issue or point to inefficient or undesirable mechanical system operation. So by monitoring these, by having these additional data loggers in place, it allows you to argue for mitigation measures. The two examples we have shown here, in the top one, you have an object that is displayed close to a window, and you can see, on a nice, bright, sunny day, there's probably a pretty significant amount of heat coming in through that window, and the data logger there would probably read differently than a data logger closer to the interior of the space. So being able to capture this and to illustrate this to other people within the organization can make an effective case for arguing for blinds or other mitigation measures. And in the lower photo, you see a radiator, which is obviously going to be adding heat and drying materials out, especially those that are stored on the shelf closest to it. So being able to tell how much heat that radiator is adding to the space, again, you can argue for a lower set point in that space if possible, different things like that. The final situation in which I'll mention in terms of where data loggers can go is mechanical systems. This wouldn't be as much for getting started on environmental monitoring, but it is something to keep in mind down the line. If you're interested in, this can be a goal or a further step once you have your program going. Logging in the mechanical systems can mean putting data loggers on the return and supply air ducts into collection spaces, as well as in the unit itself. And this allows you to tell what work is being done to the air to create the conditions that you see in the collection spaces. It offers you an opportunity to look at improving the preservation as well as operating in a more energy efficient way. So if you're interested in this, there are a number of resources available to do so, including IPI's recently released methodology, which is available for free download on the website. So just to kind of summarize, we would definitely recommend placing and having data loggers, approximately 1 logger per collection space, but then additional factors would need to be taken into account, such as extremely tall or long rooms, and if you have any specific objects or trouble areas that you would want to monitor as well. So once you have those data loggers in place, the next question is how often you should download it. This is going to be a balance between the workload that it places on staff, especially if you have a large number of data loggers or if they're spread out in multiple buildings or locations, but also the need to be able to see the data and respond within a reasonable time frame. Just having the data loggers within a collection space doesn't necessarily do anything unless you're able to look at that data on a regular basis. So in this instance, what we generally recommend is about once a month. This seems to be a good point where you can capture issues before they become too extreme, but it's not too much of an additional workload on staff. This can be further helped by regular spot checking. If staff and volunteers are regularly in these collection spaces anyway, it gives you an opportunity to catch issues even earlier. Many data loggers have a screen that will display the temperature and relative humidity, and simply having a sign next to it that gives the contact information for the designated individual, as well as some general guidelines, such as, if you see temperatures exceeding 72 degrees in this space, please contact so-and-so. That gives you an opportunity. Usually people are very aware of this, and they can alert you to what might be an issue pretty early on. Aside from once a month, we would also recommend that you pull it after significant events. Major storms and flooding have the potential of increasing, especially the relative humidity in a space fairly quickly, and power outages have been known to revert mechanical systems back to previous set points. So just pulling that data after those events will ensure that the systems are operating as they had been previously. You may also want to consider pulling data a little more regularly when you have periods of outdoor weather extremes. In particular, this can be an issue during shoulder seasons in the spring and fall, when buildings are switching from heating and cooling operations. Depending on the type of weather that we might be having during that season or just the timing of it, sometimes there can be issues with humidity, especially during those events. And the other outdoor weather extreme is what we'll be seeing in the next few weeks here, where the high temperatures and high relative humidity at summer peaks can become a real problem for a lot of building envelopes and mechanical systems to combat and keep those collection spaces at the conditions that you'd like to see. 1 full year of data is really it's an important milestone in the monitoring program, because at that point you will have an understanding of how the space responds to a range of seasonal experiences. Now, having more than 1 year is also valuable, because within each year we often have weather that is kind of exceptional. For example, this year in particular, we had a very cold and a very long winter. So if you're trying to make decisions based on that year's worth of data, it's certainly valid, but it might not give you a good sense of a good average conditions for spring, say. Okay, and the final step is actually evaluating the data. This is probably the trickiest part of the whole process, and it starts with setting standards. This is a topic in and of itself, but it involves a number of factors. One is your local climate, also your building envelope and mechanical system capabilities, and the collections themselves. the material types, their past exposure, their current deterioration levels, and their enclosure type can all play a role in how vulnerable they might be to different environmental conditions. So once you have limits set for different collection spaces, there are two different ways of looking at the data that I'll talk about today. One is the limits and the other is the fluctuations. You can see on the graph on the left here, say for example you did not want your collection spaces to exceed 60% relative humidity. If you have a lot of metal objects, you might be concerned about corrosion or just, you know, in general mold germination, that kind of thing. And you can see here that in looking at this data, there's definitely a trend that relative humidity is climbing, and we don't really see it coming back down until that very end. So when you see a trend like this, especially if you have a year's worth of data, it can help you to identify when and where those trouble areas might be, and you can be well prepared in order to address them. The other type is the fluctuations, which is the second graph here. When we see extreme fluctuations in temperature and relative humidity, it can lead to mechanical damage of objects as they try to absorb and desorb moisture in response to their environment. So seeing these extreme fluctuations can be a good opportunity to kind of either learn more about the mechanical system operation, see if something is going on there, or to look at the space itself and see if there's anything in terms of the space or the envelope that can be addressed. Okay, so that is the 5 main questions that we have seen from our experiences. But again, we'd like to encourage you, if you have additional questions, to go ahead and submit them in the box. There's also going to be a short survey of just 4 questions. It'll pop up when you go to exit the webinar. Please do answer this. It'll give us an opportunity to improve our services in the future and address any questions you may have as well. All right, and we'll give you all a chance to answer some of those questions while we do. Again, this is, if you're not as familiar with the IAPI, there are a number of resources that we offer, and we certainly encourage you to go to the website and learn some more about each of the products and services. There's a number of tools that can help with everything from photo ID and film preservation on up. So certainly encourage you, and it looks like we have a question here. Okay, so Tracy is asking, we are housed in the basement and have trouble receiving cell signals. Could you discuss that issue again?
So one of the things when I was discussing the using data, Bluetooth wireless data loggers, I was keeping in mind that if you have trouble using or getting signals in and out of that building, you might have trouble getting Bluetooth signal around. We've worked with institutions that they'll use wireless loggers and Bluetooth loggers, and even their wireless signal itself, they have to put repeaters in to get it around the building, but they'll install wireless loggers and have trouble getting that signal around their building. And they put Bluetooth loggers in and can't get it even into the next room. So they may be one room away from their collection. Their collection may be, 10 feet away from them on the other side of a wall, and they can't get the signal, so they wind up having to go in the room to collect. So it's just keeping that in mind. And again, I said it's unfortunate because to really test the logger, you'd have to have at least one in hand to see how it works within your space. But it's knowing, if you have trouble getting the signal out of your basement, you may have trouble getting a signal around, but it all depends on the facility, on the brand of loggers. Some have really good Wi-Fi and Bluetooth where it'll go through a couple different walls, and like I said, we tested one where it couldn't even go through 3 bookshelves when I was 15 feet away from it.
I'll also add, even with the Bluetooth and wireless capabilities, we still encourage at least the spot checking on a somewhat regular basis, just because oftentimes being in the space, you can notice issues that might not otherwise come across in the data. And if there's a water leak or something like that, it's a lot easier to catch visually instead of waiting until it might appear in the data. Okay, well, thank you all. Oh, it looks like we have another question here. So the question is about a museum space that has an open second floor. Is it necessary to place a data logger there? So I addressed that by saying I really like to say an open second floor, and in some instances by having an open space or having all rooms within a building may be served by a single mechanical system, there might be some question about, is this really necessary? But I would say if you have collections displayed in that space, it would be useful to see if the conditions up there vary, especially if there might be lighting might be closer to the objects up there, there might be windows, additional things that might be influencing the environment. So I'd certainly recommend it. One thing that we can also add is saying that when you install a data logger in a specific location, I would still leave it in a place for about a year or so just to make sure that there's not, say there's a radiator on that second floor that happens to kick in the winter or something like that. You want to be sure to capture that. But, after a year or so, if you feel pretty confident that the conditions are similar, you can always, relocate that data logger to a different location and kind of have some that float around a little bit, and so you're able to, do some projects where you spot check some trouble areas, things like that. So I hope that answers the question there. Did you have anything to add, Chris?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, sorry, I don't want to cut anyone off here. Okay, so this question here is about setting up a collection storage space, how to gather relevant information about the environment, storage shelves, and mechanical system to provide the client for their decision. So,
I don't mean to jump in. One of the things we do when we're setting up a program, when we're working with any institution in the beginning, we try and get as much of that from them as possible. So if you're working with a client, see how much of it they can give you. There are times when we get absolutely nothing. There are times when we'll get blueprints or layouts or even hand sketches from them to try and, sit down ahead of time and just map out, okay, this is what their collection is, this is where things are, and this is what the room or the facility looks like. And even down, we've even got mechanical system. At times, we've gotten absolutely nothing, and it winds up us having to spend an afternoon or a day on site with them, taking pictures of as much as possible, or even in some instances sketching it out by hand on our own to understand what the systems look like in the spaces so that we can evaluate where to place things.
Can I say if there's further information on that question, we'd be happy to address it in more detail. But certainly in terms of setting up a collection storage space, if it's a retrofitted space, if they have data loggers prior to the changes and there aren't going to be many envelope or mechanical system changes, that might give you a good indication of what they can expect. If it's a brand new space, I would certainly encourage you to make sure that those mechanical systems and the building envelope are maximized for the best environment for those collections. There's a number of resources available on that. We have a number through IPI, and we can talk about it further if you'd like to send us an email.
Yep, and before we end or do anything, I just want to make it clear that one of the best resources I can tell you, if anything else, is feel free to write our emails down. Both mine and Kelly have put them back up. If you have any questions, if you're just unsure about something, feel free. It doesn't hurt to ask us. We've gotten some crazy questions before, so you can't surprise us with anything you'll ask. But we're more than happy to answer any questions anyone may have, or even help somebody out to get their program up and running.
Okay, great. Well, if there are no further questions, I think we will end today's webinar. Like I said, please do fill out that survey. We will look at all the responses, and it will help us a lot in providing these kind of resources in the future. And like Chris said, feel free to reach out if you have any further questions, and best of luck in setting up your environmental monitoring program.